Tom, thank you very much for joining us here in this Managing Change series. We are fortunate to have your views for the next 20-25 minutes. And maybe start with a small introduction of yours, please.
Well, look, it's great to be here, and it's great to be able to have this conversation over on the other side of the world. So my name's Tom Mills. I'm the research director and founder of Two Oceans Strategy, which is a consultancy focused on natural resources, sustainability, and we provide ESG related data around real assets, and also we provide scenario planning analysis around what are the big trends going on in the world and how will our world look potentially in 20 to 30 years time.
Fantastic. I think we'll have a lot to talk about what the world will look like in a few months, and then of course the long horizon. Tom, you are, we're talking, while I'm based here in New Delhi today, you're sitting in the heart of United Kingdom. How is the world coping up in UK? What is happening in your part of the world today with the COVID crisis?
So I'm here in London at the sort of epicenter of the UK crisis, really. My wife's a hospital doctor. She's 3 miles away, working on the front line at the hospital there. And really we're sort of bracing ourselves for the next 2 to 3 weeks when we think the peak of this, the caseload will start to come in. I think the government has been clear about what they're advising people to do. Firstly, stay at home wherever you can, only go outside to exercise, or if you need essential provisions, once a day. Making sure that we're able to protect our healthcare workers, and so that our hospitals are not overrun, and in the process saving lives. There was some really interesting analysis, or some analysis that a lot of policy is being based on over here, conducted by Imperial College of London. And they identified 2 potential strategies. One strategy was around mitigation, which was also in the press being termed herd immunity, having enough people in the population with the antibodies who can conduct therefore won't be transmitting the disease on one area, which requires a lot of people to contract the disease, or the other is suppression, whereby we're instigating a policy of social distancing. We're working from home. We're only going out when essential, and that's the line that the UK has taken at the moment. So we've been here in sort of a sort of semi-lockdown for about a week and a half now, and people are adjusting to this new reality of how they're living. I think it's very interesting to see how different countries over here are dealing with it. The vast majority, France, Germany, Spain, Italy, the UK, have taken this suppression approach. But some, for example, Sweden, have taken a very different approach. They're looking down this mitigation approach. A lot of the shops are still open there. Their ski slopes are still open. And that's the approach that they've taken, although they're in the minority of global policymakers doing that. I think only time will tell how that rolls out, really, and how that plays out. But initially there was a period of slight panic buying or hoarding, especially of loo roll, which was a sort of precious commodity over here for a while. Luckily now that has subsided as people realize that the supply chains and the ability to get from farm to fork is intact, and actually there's no real anxiety there about being able to feed ourselves. But just to answer the question, we were looking at some business planning here in last year, and we were seeing the yield curve of US Treasuries inverting. We thought there could have been there's a recession on the horizon. However, we would have never, ever predicted anything like this. This is beyond it's a real black swan event. We could have never have predicted it. And some of the key things that we're really interested in going forward, and if we're able to look a year's time, 2 years' time, there's some really interesting questions around what is that relationship between the state, business and society, now that the state has taken on more of a role. business is the executor of government policy in some regards, or being supported by government to conduct their business. How will these trends around from shareholder to stakeholder capitalism survive COVID-19? Will this be seen to have been a nice to have during a period of a bull cycle, or will it be maintained? I'm not sure. What will the city be like? This concept of this great concentration of smart minds, academia, business, commerce, and art. Will that be considered to be too dangerous a place to live, and the value trade-offs between space and lifestyle decided that it's not worth the value that it's been placed on? Then two more around climate change is an area that is going to be really interesting to see how that plays out after this crisis, in terms of when the economy gets ramped up again and all means are put back on developing, on keeping the economy going. What will happen to some of the climate change ambitions in COP26, which we look at in Glasgow? And then lastly, these poles of nationalism against globalism. We're seeing that the response has been predominantly national. We're seeing a lot of healthcare supplies being stopped from being traded over borders. We're seeing that it's a global problem, but it's being solved at the national level. And how will multilateral institutions fare? So I really want to have this conversation again in a year's time, so we can start to really sort of dissect some of these trends and challenges.
So Tom, let me ask you, particularly from a UK perspective, the messages that we're getting, for example, the Prime Minister is down, Prince Charles is now isolated. What is the sentiment like on the ground? Of course, it'll have business ramifications over a period of time, but what are the immediate social ramifications, and how are people coping with it?
It's a really good question. I think this is a very, very difficult time in terms of there is a lot of anxiety there, but that's not just anxiety about contracting the disease. The vast majority of those people who go on to have severe complications will have some comorbidities. Some of the data coming out of Italy at the moment suggests that only 12% of those who contract the disease who go on to die in hospital at the moment contracted it, died as a direct result of COVID-19, as opposed to other factors. So I think that's one side, but the big challenge that we're facing at the moment is around this economic challenge. A lot of people are able to continue to work. However, those individuals who are working in industries such as entertainment, such as tourism, such as travel, they are struggling a lot in order to ensure that they will be able to meet their paychecks and be able to survive the next period of time. The government has provided a vast a stimulus package for these groups. However, that is still quite uncertain, and due to the scale of that package, it's just being worked through at the moment, and that's especially apparent for those who are self-employed as well. So there is anxiety. However, people are very respectful. People, if you go out over the last week, the situation has changed dramatically. A week ago or 2 weeks ago, people were still going to the pub, still meeting up in restaurants, whereas now if you go to the shops, people are very respectful of the distance, the 2-meter social distancing rules, and the feeling that this is something we as a society are going to have to get through together, and there's a great togetherness about that we're experiencing in the UK at the moment. And I wonder if that's similar in India.
Yes, of course there is the good thing was that our leadership, in my personal opinion, so far has been very strong. So the mandate has been very clear. Authorities have been channelized very, very quickly. But let me ask you a question there, Tom, in terms of, like we were talking about earlier. Do you think that the entire policy and the investment horizon, or the attention span of, say, authorities, the governments, the businesses also to an extent, will now shift to healthcare, given that can stall everything? You can do anything else, but healthcare is something that needs massive attention.
I think it's a really, again, it's a very interesting question, this. And I think one of my favorite columnists, someone called Simon Cooper, wrote in the Financial Times this weekend, sort of comparing healthcare workers to soldiers. And I think this is a very interesting comparison, because today, a lot of the activities that society is doing, we in the UK last week, we went out onto the streets at 8 o'clock at night and clapped the NHS workers. They do this nightly in Paris and in Brussels, in Germany, in Italy. And this is very reminiscent of the military parades that we saw, when people would come back in our country, back from Afghanistan or back from the Gulf War. The healthcare workers are really replacing coming up alongside the soldiers as these great individuals of sacrifice and duty. A similar scenario happened with in relation to personal protective equipment. If we look at 2008 in Afghanistan, there was a big uproar that the soldiers didn't have enough personal protective equipment. We're seeing this replayed, but for the healthcare workers today. And also, if you look at it in terms of numbers, around 7,000 British soldiers have died in combat since the Second World War. However, our best case number of people who are likely to die from coronavirus is 20,000. So there's this shift in looking at actually the healthcare. Healthcare is a thing we're going to have to spend a lot more money on. Currently, around 9% of GDP on average is spent on healthcare in developing countries. And I think politically, especially with this crisis, it's now become more and more politically possible to spend more on healthcare. And the UK, and that's something with our National Health Service, which was this great totem of Britishness. We're expecting that to happen as well. And also going forward, it's likely that we'll start to see these new roles like epidemic czars within governments who are playing prominent roles to ensure that this doesn't happen again. So I think answer to that question, yes. And I think we may see some shift of that coming from the defense budget as well. Who knows?
Absolutely. Defense against what? I think that
exactly
defines this thing. So in terms of your understanding, I mean, you're so closely aligned with the entire policy, climate, what is happening within nations, between nations. What is your sense, Tom? Do you see the world pecking order changing? A question that everybody is asking in the next 1 to 5 years.
Oh, good question. Changing as a result of this virus. So, well, that's quite a tough question. But so, in my mind, a lot of this discussion depends on how much testing, and specifically antibody testing, a nation can do to get its economy back on track as quickly as possible. I think if you press pause on the economy and put it into, well, say we're pressing pause on the economy at the moment, when you press play again, the economy won't be coming back singing the same tune at the same volume. That's impossible. There are too many fixed costs to do that. I think if you're looking at the industrialized nations, there's such vast costs associated with stopping production within refineries, furnaces, smelters, that if you stop them, it's very expensive to then start them up again. And I think that will have a substantial cost throughout the economy for those heavily industrialized countries. I think we're starting to see noises around this idea of getting antibody tests and certification of antibodies to allow people to then go back and restart the economy, to go back and be consumers again, to start this demand cycle. I also think that those countries who are able to manage this the best and get that demand back on quickest, or are willing to take these trade-offs between life saves and the economy, is going to be a very key one as we're coming out of this induced economic coma as well. But in terms of changing the geopolitical pecking order, which was already changing dramatically, I think is a very difficult one. I think we're just going to have to wait and see. I think with regards to, and I have to talk a bit about some views on India and the Indian economy, but I think that's going to be a bit of wait and see as well.
Great. Great.
I
mean,
realized I didn't answer the question there, so it's a very, very difficult question.
I think you're right. I mean, I think it's rather early to answer that question. I think you're right. How much who can come out of balancing the economic and human value, the healthcare side of things will be a clear winner. And I think that'll clarify only by about 6 months.
Yeah, and I think this, how the stimulus package, how the debt will be able to be repaid, I think there's some interesting questions around intergenerational equity here. I think, are we saddling the future generations with a whole host of debt that they're going to have to pay off over a long period of time? I think there's a real challenge around shifts in different sectors. Are different sectors ever going to be able to bounce back to how they were before, even if that could be travel, aviation? Are people going to change their activities their habits over 6 months so that they do things differently, potentially? And I think we're just going to have to see how that plays out. But in terms of India and the Indian economy, I think there's some really, going into this crisis, India was seeing quite a long, prolonged economic slowdown. If you look at a poll of economists over the December quarter, growth was around 4.7%, the lowest it's been. There are revised statistics coming out of the Statistics Office that suggest that growth peaked in 2017. I've been working in India for a long time, and over the majority of that time, it's been the world's fastest growing democracy. India's booming, but now there's been this slowdown. So it's going into this from a pretty low base position, and I think that will be challenging. However, I think there are three factors that support that may lessen the impact in India. I think the first one is around India is a bit more isolated to China's supply chains than, say, America or Europe. I know there is still substantial supply chains, value chains that happen in the motor industry and some manufacturing industries and pharmaceuticals especially. However, it seems to be less integrated than, say, America or Europe. Secondly, the oil price. Brent is trading at about $27 a barrel at the moment. I think West Texas Intermediate is about 21. India imports over 80% of its oil. This is a massive import burden. Their energy import burden is vast, and this will have a big benefit to the fiscal account and the current account. And then lastly, I think the US-America trade war will have a beneficial impact on India, in that people looking to invest in manufacturing in China will now look at investing in manufacturing in India, as it's more of a sustainable jurisdiction to do so. And I think that will be very positive for the economy. That being said, it's going to be very, very difficult. For me, the whole question is, how long does this go on for? How long is the economy in an induced coma for? How long is the lockdown going to hold, and when can people start consuming again, which is the driver of the Indian economy? And that's going to be the factor that determines how well India comes out of this, I think.
Absolutely. So Tom, you've been. I mean, I've of course seen your work and the amount of work that you do. It's cross-border. And extremely deep in various areas of execution, particularly policy and other areas. What do you see the post-COVID era like to be?
I think going back to this question that these areas that I highlighted at the beginning, I think there will be some changes, some serious changes, and I think one of the biggest changes will be globalism against nationalism, the role of the state and the size of the state within countries. I think the state is taking on more power as it's going through the corona crisis in order to deal with it. They're instigating more laws. Whether those will bounce back afterwards is something we'll have to see. I think these ideas around long-term shareholder versus stakeholder business, this is another question that I think we will need to review, because there will be a lot of pressure on businesses to create the most economic output at the least cost, and that will come at the cost of negative economic externalities like carbon emissions, like social challenges, and I think that may suffer if it's considered a nice to have, not an essential to have. And I think the other big discussion will be around climate change. How has this affected our discussion of climate change as well? So I think it's too early to look at the direction of travel, because we're a week into these lockdowns. But again, the key will be which country is able to control this the quickest and get the economy back on track again. And China has demonstrated that it's been able to do this. Its command and control stance of government has said, we have been able to contain this outbreak, and now let's start going back to work. Let's start going back. And if you look at a lot of the indicators there, coal consumption's up, power consumption's up, travel's up. People are going out into the shops and buying again. So that demand shock is starting to be lessened.
I think we have a lot of different opinions about China springing up back again while the world is now locking down. So there's a discussion happening around that. But thank you so much, Tom. It was phenomenal hearing your views. And I wholeheartly agree that we should revisit this interview in another 8 to 10 months. And
I agree. I would love that.
Where we stand. Thank you very much, Tom, for your time today.
Not at all.
Thank you. So we'll cut it here.
But Deepshikha, do you want to talk about, because one of the things that I think is like, do you want to talk about distance learning or coping strategies, or do you think that's enough?
You can do that. I mean, we can add another component to it. Why not? Yes, absolutely. Because
I think there's an interesting point around this being a time for distance learning.
Okay, sure.
And I've got you've had something on mental health, haven't you? So I don't think there's any point in doing that.
We've had mental health, but I think it is, we can have so what we're also doing is we are releasing sets of video bites as well. So if you can give a running bite on what your view is, then this portion we can take as a separate component of, managing.
Why don't we do that? And then we can do, I wouldn't mind mental health for me, and if you want, I can talk a bit about, no, maybe not. Well, if you want, I could talk about work. No, and then I wouldn't mind talking about, the distance learning. I think would your subscribers and community be interested in sort of resources around distance learning, advice about distance learning, do you think?
Right now it's a very big topic. You can also do a separate, just your video recording on that, a 2-minute video recording on the distance learning as a part. You can structure the talk the way you like, and that can be used separately as well.
Okay.
We can do it now, or we can do it.
Let's do it. If you've got time, let's do it now, and then you can do the edit as well.
Perfect. Let's do that. So, how do you want to structure it? Do you want to do a monologue, or?
Well, why don't you ask, if you ask me a question about how do you maintain good mental health, and then you can tack it to something like that, or how do you maintain good mental health practices during this time?
Sure. Okay. So Tom, with all that's happening around you, it's a very, very busy time. It's the world of WhatsApp that we live in, and overzealous information and forwards. What is your personal coping mechanism, and how do you ensure that you're still learning and getting exposed to the right information?
So I think this issue around maintaining physical and mental health during a period of time when you're unable to go out is such an important one. So but also I think that there are a number of tools, strategies, and activities which can help you. So especially around these hygiene factors to do with mental health. Firstly, maintaining relationships with your loved ones, whether that's family or friends. For example, we set up on Sunday, we had a virtual board game afternoon where we had zoomed in our closest friends, and we were able to play a board game, which was fantastic. We've got a pub quiz coming up on Thursday, which is a great British pastime. And we're going to have, on Easter, we'll have a roast. We'll have a real roast, but virtually we'll be there with our family as well. So we can maintain those close relationships over the technological solutions we have at the moment, like Zoom and Skype. exercise. Exercise is a crucial element of maintaining good mental hygiene. And I think there's a load of fantastic online resources out there at the moment that require no equipment, that are free, that you can do with little space. And I think Joe Wicks, the body coach, who is becoming a bit of a celebrity over in the UK at the moment, is a fantastic person to be watching and working out with. And also I think that people like Gemma Soul at Cycle and some of the Barry's Bootcamp training sessions, which require no equipment, are fantastic as well.
Excellent.
Routine, ensuring that you're able to continue your working routine, your sleeping routine. Working out what is a work time and what is downtime is crucial during this period. Avoid refreshing your newsfeed. The newsfeed will be highlighting the worst. Their job is to highlight the worst, the most unusual, and that is that's something that is going to cause a lot of anxiety. So, and I'm very guilty of this as well. Checking in through mindfulness practices, which I suspect are on some of the other videos. And finally, I think there's this key point around acceptance. We cannot change this. There's no way. This is a situation that we're in. There's no way that we can control it at the moment. And I think at the beginning I suffered a lot because I was trying to, grapple with how we could change the situation. But I realized that we're not. We're just here at the moment. So those are some elements that I'm trying to instigate in my life to maintain good mental health and good health during this period.
Thank you very much, Tom, for your time today. It's been wonderful talking to you.